And welcome back. I'm Rosa Clemente, and we're here in Boston, Massachusetts at the National Conference on Media Reform. This is Free Speech TV, and we're streaming live on freespeech.org. Let all your friends know we're streaming live a lot of the workshops and panels that are happening, along with the plenaries and the closing plenary tonight. Thank you for staying with us. And my next guest is Janine Jackson from FAIR, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. I know that the show Counterspin has been on at least 15 years on over 150 stations. I'm a Pacifica baby, so I listen to that once a week on WBAI in New York. So it's a pleasure to have you here, Janine, and all the work that you've particularly done as a woman of color in journalism and inspiring us. So thank you for being here. Well, you do. We know who you are.
That's fabulous to hear, I have to say. We all feel we're just, doing our bit, and the reason conferences like this are such a pleasure in some ways are you get to get some feedback, some direct feedback from human beings saying, hey, I listened to your show. That is fabulous for me, or we appreciate your work, or I read an article that was helpful to me. That's the whole reason we do it, so thank you very much.
So for our audience who might not know a lot about FAIR, can you tell us about the work, FAIR, the organization, the work that you do with FAIR?
Sure. FAIR is a media watch group, and we basically talk about what's left out, what's wrong with big media, mainstream media. We don't talk about alternatives as much. We're talking about the big bad guys mostly. We have a magazine, a print magazine called Extra. We have Counterspin, as you say, and we have a very popular website with 26 years now of archived documentation of media bias and censorship, and documentation of people fighting back and resisting that media bias and censorship and doing something different. So that's what we basically do, is look at whatever the story is. If it's healthcare, for example, if it's the war in wherever the war is in at the moment, we try to talk about who's in the conversation, what sources are being spoken to, and what groups of people are being spoken about but not spoken to.
Yeah, when I listen to Counterspin, I think what people get out of it is a very clear-cut knowledge of where this information is coming from. Because no matter what, alternative, the best progressive media, you still have to question the source.
Well, what we try to teach and talk about are really the critical thinking skills that you should bring to bear on any media that you are looking at. It doesn't matter if it's a website that you've never heard of before or the New York Times. You have to bring that same set of questions. You always have to ask, who am I hearing from? Who am I not hearing from? What's not in this story? And where's it all coming from? Who is in charge? Who's in power at this media outlet, and what does that influence mean? And if you're talking about corporate owners, well, that influence means a tremendous, tremendous amount. But essentially, those questions, what am I being told, what's left out, what more information is there, how are things being labeled in a way that might not be helpful, all of those questions should be brought to bear. Alternative media, mainstream media, and those terms are in flux. You ask those questions no matter what you're reading or watching or listening to.
Now, I mean, as a woman of color myself, someone, who ran for office as a journalist, I feel women of color, we're like at the bottom of every, equity, inequality index, how we're represented, and you've been doing this work for so long. Do you see it, where are the stories as it regards particularly women of color in America? I make a distinction because I get to see amazing internationalist women, which I think is incredible, but then I'm often like, what about the mother on the block? Where are those stories of kind of the average woman of color in America?
Well, that's an excellent question, and one of the reasons that media, new media, different media is not it's not a parlor game for me. It's not like, wouldn't that be theoretically nice? It's about people's lives. And when we're talking about women of color, I mean, as you say, when sometimes we get a conversation about gender, sometimes we get a conversation about race, and somehow black women and women of color are not really in either of those.
Or all they want us to talk about is gender, which is obviously critical to who we are, but we can also talk about whatever, mechanical engineering or healthcare, not just always be regulated to the gender-specific kind of dialogue?
I think too many people think that that's what diversity means is, oh, we're going to talk about abortion, so let's bring in a woman. Well, what about when you're talking about the economy? You know, women are particularly and especially affected by economic changes. Women have a particular contribution to the economy. Why are we not everywhere? Why are we not in that story too? And there was a study that recently came out that found that women of color have essentially net wealth of zero. You know,
the Center for yeah, because I've been using that report for a year and letting like that number so stark. If you remember the numbers,
I wish I did, but essentially
$5 to every maybe $40,000 that white women have, and you're like $5.
And then that's not before you even get to white men, and to, you know, so it really is, there really is a special situation that women of color have that is not addressed in the media, and we know and could talk about when we see women of color in the big media what that context is and how unhelpful that generally is. But I take your point very strongly that I don't just want, oh, Women of Color Day, you know, we'll make it Friday and we'll do stories about, you know, what's their hair, you know, or what their life is like. No, it's really about integrating all voices into every conversation and not dividing them in that way. That's diversity isn't something that you tack on to news after you've done integrity and independence, and then if you've got some time left, well, then you'll sprinkle in some diversity. If your media is not diverse on all levels, class, ethnicity, gender, it's not good journalism, period.
And I think the class issue is one that, you know, is on the back burner of almost every conversation. And a little bit here at this conference, you know, where's the conversation on class? But we're coming together at least in a space where we can have that dialogue and debate. So what do you see as it regards the upcoming presidential election? You know, there's a lot of issues, obviously, but how do you think journalism is going to play out, or journalists, particularly progressive journalists, as it regards, you know, maybe questioning or coming harder, as we say in hip-hop, at President Barack Obama, you know, and the Democratic Party, not just their leader?
Well, it's way past time for that now, isn't it? I mean, I think in terms of doing journalism, it's really quite simple. You just don't define what you do during an election as, well, let's get the statement from every candidate every day. Yeah. Elections are not just about who has already got enough money and enough exposure to be in the race and what they say, and then what the other guy says in response. Elections are about people and about people's needs. And if you look around now at this time, you're going to be asking an entirely different slate of questions than the candidates are likely going to want to talk about.
Well, I hope that that at least we have that dialogue. So, Janine, thank you. Janine Jackson from Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. They also have, I think it might be a bi-monthly magazine called Extra that you could pick up anywhere. And thank you for being here with us at Free Speech TV, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
It's been a pleasure, and thank you for all you do as well.
Thank you, Janine. Thank you. This is Rosa Clemente. We're at the National Conference on Media Reform, and we'll be right back.